Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live, or maybe pre-taped, on YouTube talking offensive line today from the Antonio Cromartie studio and part with Huggies. All brought to you by FanDuel. Very excited to have our friend Brandon Thorn on with us. So we're going to bring him right in, talking all things offensive line. Having Brandon returning here. Brandon, how you doing, man?
Nope, we lost.
Great. We don't have you in the IFBs now.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
Very
Okay.
professional of us, just announcing it. Brandon, it's good to have you back. First, I want to start by letting you announce where everything that all the work you're doing, where it is, so people could see it and find it, and then we'll do it again at the end.
Yeah, so Bleacher Report, you can find all of my offensive line scouting reports with the scouting department there. We are doing the entire NFL draft again, so I handle all offensive line. But yeah, you could find us anywhere on Bleacher Report. We have a big board, we do mock drafts, and then within those, the linked players have our scouting reports as well. So I'm also doing stuff on trenchwarfare.substack.com with players individually. I just did one with Keylan Rutledge, a film room. I've done 4 of those so far this year, and I'll have my annual My Guys article coming out here shortly as well, which is kind of like my 10 favorite guys in the draft as well. So,
love it. So obviously encourage all of our viewers and listeners to go check out all of Brandon's work. Before we get into the rankings, we'll go through tackles, guards, and centers. Some news this week that I wanted to get your opinion on, and it's the Detroit Lions essentially saying they would like Penei Sewell, who plays right tackle, to move to the left side with Taylor Decker out in Detroit. What were your thoughts on that and a move for Penei Sewell at this point in his career?
yeah, I mean, with Penei Sewell specifically, I feel pretty good about it. Him being able to make that transition and be still really, really good. I think of Tristan Wirfs and, sort of that archetype and how he played right and then moved over to left, played left in college like Penei. So I just think, generally speaking too, when you're speaking of like truly elite level guys, the guys that you could count on one hand, at a given position on the offensive line, those guys specifically, I feel very comfortable with them being able to make the switch as opposed to, any of the lesser kind of talented guys. So I think that's part of it as well. And I would classify certainly Penei Sewell in that category. So, considering his overall talent level and his experience doing it already, I feel like he's going to be able to make that transition just fine.
To me, it makes sense if, there's a right tackle out there that you can bring in and is sort of a reason to move Penei Sewell. Like, oh, look, here's a name that we can get that we really like at right tackle, and it's good because we know we can move Penei Sewell left tackle and he'll be fine. But this feels like they're almost preempting that and just saying, no, we think it's better to have him at left tackle just in a vacuum, and then we'll figure out right tackle going forward. Like, would you want your best offensive lineman at left tackle as opposed to right tackle just as a matter of course and then try and find a right tackle, or would you only want to make that move if and when you found the right guy to come in?
Yeah, so I think to answer that specific question, I would probably not be as set on putting my best guy at left tackle as opposed to right. But with this specific case with Penei Sewell, I remember, him coming out of Oregon, the whole thing was, at least, in the discussions I was having, especially is like let's see this guy play left tackle. Like, I don't want him to play right. I think if anything, move Taylor Decker, and don't move Penei Sewell. But they wound up moving Sewell, and then of course he settled in. He's a perennial All-Pro, all that. But we saw him play left a little bit, as a pro, very briefly, and he looked really good doing it. I think it was preseason that I remember him doing that. But yeah, I mean, so with Penei Sewell specifically, I think he, based on everything that I thought coming out, he was going to be better left than right tackle. I still think, I mean, at this point, considering he's a top 2, right tackle in the league, is he going to be better at left? I don't know that, but I feel very good that he's going to be at least as good as he is at left. So yeah, wherever that, it's just then when you stack that in the hierarchy of the position, it changes because left tackle is just deeper than right tackle, much deeper in talent. So yeah, if you're the second best right tackle, maybe you're the third or fourth best left tackle. I don't know. I mean, who knows? But, I guess we'll see. But I just feel good. Like, him specifically, this is going to be just fine. And, this tackle class as well has, some more right tackles and left tackles. So maybe they like a couple of guys. So
I'm assuming that's a part of it. And, just to be clear, for people that have listened to us for a long time, I think they know my stance on it. For newer listeners, the idea that the left tackle is either a more difficult job or a more important job, I don't think holds water in today's NFL. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think the perception is the blind side's more valuable to protect, left tackle's more valuable? That's been the perception for years. The NFL has gone away from that, the way they pay right tackles. Just drafting a Penei Sewell and putting him at right tackle in the last few years shows how valuable right tackles are, equivalent. Do you agree with that overall as an assessment?
Yeah, I think it's pretty even. I still think, just based on the way, I don't know the contracts, 100% off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure left tackles are still higher paid than right tackles overall. The bridge, is shorter there, than it ever was. But still, that seems the way that the NFL does it, is they favor left tackles more, they pay them more. I feel like the more talented guys typically are playing left tackle. Every year when I do my top 75, this stands out to me, and I do top 15 at each position. I look at left and right tackles, and it's just the depth of good or better is just much deeper at left tackle than right tackle. And that's just where the NFL funnels those guys, I guess. Now is, does that make sense based on the pass rushers they face and the responsibilities they have? I think that's a discussion. I guess the only thing that really stands out to me is the blind side discussion, with the right-handed quarterbacks. But I've heard you guys talk about this and other guys talk about it. The quarterback can see pressure quicker on the right side, given he's looking that way. So maybe that can impact him a little bit more as opposed to stuff he can't see. And so it's like, I think, if you have really good tackle, you put them on whatever side they're more comfortable at, and then you build around that. So, that's kind of the way I see it.
Love it. Fun discussion. So we'll see what happens with Penei, but that's the rumblings this week at the owners and coaches meetings. Let's talk about this draft class, Brandon. High level, what are your thoughts overall? The offensive line class as a whole, strengths, weaknesses, where does it stack up before we get into the individual rankings?
Yeah, I think this is I would say, solid offensive line class. Based on the last 6 that I've done, this is probably, somewhere just right in the middle. I think I like the guard kind of group here the most, I would say. I think that there's 4 or 5 guards that I like a lot to come in right away, day one, start and be solid, with chances of being good to very good. It's not a very top-heavy class overall in terms of a blue chip, quote unquote, guy who has a top 10 grade in a vacuum. I think in this overall draft class, which I don't know quite as much about, but have a good feel for it. I would say in general, tackles are going to get, if you're a tackle who could feasibly start in the NFL as a rookie, you're going to get drafted in the first round. And especially in a class that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of overall blue chip talent, you're going to get pushed up further into that round because you play a premium position that there's just not a lot of quality starting tackles, period. So there's, a tackle tax. I think that's a very real thing, similar to quarterback. So, but yeah, tackle wise, there's, 4 or 5 guys here that I think could play early on within their first year or two and be solid and potentially really good, but no home run, I would say, at any of the positions in terms of all pro, Pro Bowl, in my opinion, year one. But, there's 8 or 9 guys here who are probably going to start as rookies overall in this class, I think.
All right, let's start there with the tackles. You said it's not necessarily a blue chip class, but who's tackle 1 in this class for you?
Yeah, so my favorite tackle in this class is Utah's right tackle, Spencer Fano. And to me, it's based on his movement skills, athletic ability, and competitive toughness and effort level and the way he plays. I think he has excellent contact balance. And I just think, when you watch him specifically in pass protection, his ability to expand his set points and protect the corner, I think is really, really good. And I think anytime that you can widen that corner to, 9+ yards and widen pass rushers past the top of the quarterback's drop as a tackle, that signifies your range in pass protection. And I think his is very good. And I think you see that translate to the run game as well, specifically on, I would say, the backside of run blocks, outside zone, sort of cutoffs, overtakes. I think he's very good at that. I think on the front side, combo and climbing up to the second level, screens, front side of outside zone, those sorts of runs. He could be a real weapon there as well. I think my biggest question, and the reason why I have like a late first round grade on him, is because I have some questions about his play strength and his overall, I would say, frame and size, and his ability to root his feet and anchor against power down the middle of his frame, and then also take ground, and got to have assorted moments on angle, drive blocks, base blocks, down blocks against down linemen specifically. I think you'll see probably a little bit more stalemates there than you would want to see from a real high-end tackle. So, but that could be kind of mitigated, depending on what he's asked to do, what he's not asked to do. So that's kind of why I'm not like super all in on him as like a top 10 kind of grade, but I do see a year one starter who could be a really nice player in specific systems as well. So, but really his calling card to me is that range and pass protection. I think he's really loose, fluid, and he sticks on blocks really well.
Do you have any concerns at all about the arm length thing? Because we're doing this every year now, from now until the end of time. Obviously, with Will Campbell in the Super Bowl, that became a huge story. And then this draft cycle, it's a story again because, in part, the guy at the combine is shortchanging everyone. So Spencer Fano went from like, oh, wow, those are radically undersized, too short arms, to then in his pro day, we're just below the threshold again. I think he's up to 32 7/8 inches arm length at his pro day, which is still below the Rashawn Slater number that everyone wants to see, that 33-inch arms. But, do you think that that's any kind of limiting factor for him? And also, he looks like a guy that could play all 5 positions on the offensive line. Do you see him only as a tackle, or would you, project him inside at all at the next level?
I don't see him only as a tackle, no. I mean, this is, I have him as OT1, but I think the most important classification for him to me is OL1, because I think he's the guy I would want more than any other guy in this draft along the offensive line, regardless of position. So I just think I would rather bet on him becoming a good starter somewhere than anywhere else, than anybody else in this draft becoming a good starter anywhere else, essentially. So yeah, I do think he could play center, he could play guard, specifically with tackle in his arms, 32 and an eighth or 32 and a 7/8, whatever. I think the more that I've kind of looked at it the last couple of years, I think wingspan also should be a part of the discussion, just in terms of the width of your frame and how much space you're actually taking up. I think that is as, if not more important than arm length. And when you look at that, his wingspan is 80 plus, which is significantly bigger than Will Campbell. Who's 77 and change. So I think that's, a little bit more of an important differentiator, but overall big picture, is it like really something that you're going to, stick him at tackle or not based purely off of that? No, I don't think that's the case. But, so I don't think that he's very narrowly built necessarily. I don't think it really looks like that on film either. Yeah, I mean, if you're under 33 and you're 32 arms in certain scenarios against certain pass rushers, it can work against you. But I think when you have other traits like movement skills or hand usage, your skill set is built out and robust, you can overcome that. Which I think his is to a certain extent, but I really think the athletic ability is going to work in his favor, and his ability to recover and, kind of keep his core strength and his contact balance through contact, I think is also going to help him when guys are able to get into his frame. It's not necessarily going to break him down, in the same way that it may somebody else without those traits. So, I think he's going to be, that's why I go to late first round. Like I see like a good starter here. I don't necessarily see if he sticks at tackle, if he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowl kind of guy or anything like that. But there's a lot to like about him. And I think any of the 5 positions really is, I feel the same about him, I would say, as tackle.
His play style specifically as well seems well suited to mitigating the arm length thing. Like his favorite kind of go-to move in his pass sets is that kind of feint with his hands, get the defensive line to commit to his move and then go and engage. Like that feels like a move that specifically, I'm not saying he does it because of his short arms, but it's like it works perfectly, right? Like that's the kind of move you would want to be specializing in if you did have short arms and you were worried about, if you both engage at the same time, the defensive lineman's gonna beat me with length.
Yeah. Yeah, he does have a nice like kind of a bait or a flash with his hand to kind of throw off the timing of rushers and force them into the move before they want to, and then he gets his hands on them after that. So right. Yeah, he utilizes his quickness well. He has kind of a deceptive style and pass protection, which I think is nice. He's, that is tricky in the NFL too, because guys can get a beat on that better than they can in college. And specifically with him as well, one of the parts of his evaluation I think is worth mentioning is Utah was a very run-heavy scheme. I believe they ran the ball more than anybody else in their conference. And when you watch them, on film as well, it sticks out. He's just not in a lot of positions in terms of true drop-back passes. They ran a lot of 12, 13 personnel, 6 offensive line formations. So he's offered a lot of protection. They're running the ball a ton. So is he going to be in a situation like that as a pro? Probably not. So he could be a little bit more exposed with some of his techniques in pass protection as a pro if he's actually forced to do it more. So I think he's, there's some questions there for me in terms of his translation to the pro game as well, in terms of what he's asked to do, what he's not asked to do based on what he was in college. So that's always one of those things when you're watching college guys that stands out to me, specifically when it's as lopsided as it was at Utah in terms of run pass and all that. I know we talk about, the David Bailey game, and yeah, that game, was great because we were able to see him, kind of pass protecting more than we typically did the rest of the year. But I watched pretty much almost every game of his this year, and a lot of it was just a slog to get through because it's just like, inside zone, 6 offensive line, 2 tight ends, 65% of the game. And it's like, you'll see him pin pull. And, so the run game was a little bit more, easy to get stuff out of him in terms of projecting him as a pro. But like pass pro was, unless you had a PFF filter or something like that, it took a while to get some really quality reps on his film.
The tournament is here right now. FanDuel customers can get up to $300 in bonus bets. Get them back every day for 10 days. Here's how it works. You place a tournament bet using the token. If it doesn't win, you'll get up to $300 back in bonus bets every single day for 10 straight days. That's 10 chances to play all tourney long, from game props and money lines to spreads, totals, futures, and more. You can even mix things up with same-game parlays for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to fill out your bracket, FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the action day after day. So visit FanDuel.com/33rd to sign up today. That's FanDuel.com/33rd to get in on the action. 21 plus select states. For Kansas in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, 18 plus in D.C., Kentucky, Wyoming. Bonus bets are non-withdrawable and expire 7 days after receipt. Tokens are received in increments of 1 per day. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER, 1-800-MY-RESET. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org. Call 800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY. Text HOPE-NY in New York. And call 1-877-770-7867 in Louisiana. All right, Brandon, let's go to offensive tackle 2. We got Fano, number 1. Who's number 2 for you?
Yeah, so number 2 for me is Kadyn Proctor. Right now from Alabama, left tackle. Proctor's, I have a second-round grade on him, kind of middle of the second. So I see a potential kind of impact guy, but not necessarily a guy who's going to come in and start and be steady right away. But this is kind of my second-round bucket, typically for for tackles where guys who clearly physically, in terms of their traits and the flash, when you watch them, it's high end. It's a guy you could see being a really good pro offensive lineman, tackle or guard for Proctor. I think I'm keeping him a tackle for now, but he's another guy. If you kick him inside somewhere like Philly, play right guard next to Lane Johnson, I think that'd be incredible.
Do you have any examples of a guy with a second or late? You said a late first for Fano and a second for Proctor. Any examples of players from past years? Because like you said, these are players who are capable of going top 10, 15, or 20, but you're in a vacuum putting a valuation on them, which is different from where they'll go on draft night.
Yeah. Just looking at my prior classes here in terms of that grade. Yeah, I mean, like last year, a very similar grade was Josh Connerly for me from Oregon. So I had a second round grade on him. I thought, again, with him, it's totally different than Proctor, but I had a lot of play strength concerns with Josh Connerly. And I think that we saw some of that manifest this year for Washington. I think overall he was fine, solid, maybe close to it. I don't know that he was a top 15 right tackle last year, in my opinion. He had flashes though. So it was just, yeah, I mean, that's kind of an example. Tyler Guyton, basically the same grade the year prior. Guyton has been up and down. He's been injured. That's hurt him, but he came in very raw. Physical traits were outstanding. Flashes were outstanding. He's basically been like that as a pro to me. I mean, the flashes are great, but he's very inconsistent, and he's also hurt, so hasn't been able to really stay on the field and play. The year prior to that, I'm looking at Anton Harrison. Had a higher second round grade on him, but a little bit up and down with Anton Harrison as well. But I think he's trended upwards lately with Jacksonville. So yeah, that's the kind of guy that I see Proctor kind of fitting into that bucket. So
a lot of players that went late first over the last couple of years. Yeah, that's just good to get that perspective. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure.
What else do you see from Proctor?
Yeah, I mean, Proctor. So the thing with Proctor, I've went on a ride with his evaluation because watching him last year next to Tyler Booker or, the year prior, I was really high on Kadyn Proctor, and I expected him to make a jump this year, and I don't think he really made it, essentially. I think he was very inconsistent this year, especially the first 7-8 games or so, the first 5 especially, but then even after that, it was really the last 2 or 3 that, for me, I started to see a little bit more consistency, less glaring losses, less just whiffing on guys. I've heard different things about maybe his weight being a little high early in the season. He kind of got that down and then was able to play with a little bit better body control. So maybe that was part of it. But yeah, I still have concerns about just his kind of top heavy sort of over aggressive style where it basically leads him to overextending and lunging into contact and just missing, missing big and glaring. And that's going to be a tough thing to correct in the NFL, especially at tackle. Although, when you watch him just at his size, 350 plus, the way he can get out of his stance and get to a spot is really, I think, special. He has an initial quickness and explosiveness to him that it's just rare for 350 plus. Most 350 plus guys we see are vertical setting, getting to a spot, and they're more slow twitch kind of guys. He's a very fast twitch, fast muscle fiber kind of guy. So that to me, in of itself, at his size, is something you could harness and turn into maybe a special NFL offensive lineman. However, it's contrasted with all these glaring losses of him just not playing with good, I would say, positional leverage and understanding of where he is in relation to the defender and, the guard next to him, and oversetting guys and creating all these advantageous avenues for defensive linemen to beat him. It's, he's kind of an enigma, in this class, in my opinion. So do you draft that guy in the second round? I think you probably should. I mean, if I was betting, I would expect him to go in the first round, though, just because of the traits and stuff. But for me, that's a second round guy, just because you're swinging for the fences, and you can miss big on him as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think those guys you're describing, the ones that have all the traits to be a really good offensive lineman, but the inconsistency is too much, and there's too much negative there. I think those are the hardest guys to project because plenty of offensive linemen fit that description, and they improve, they tidy it up, and once they iron out the negatives, they become really good NFL offensive linemen. There's also plenty of guys that you sort of bank on, and they're always inconsistent. Like they just never improve on that, and then that's what stops them being high-end NFL offensive linemen. Like the way you were describing his losses, I saw exactly the same thing, and that's why I want, if it's me, I would want to kick him inside to guard at the next level, where you hide a lot of that, a lot of those losses and a lot of those negatives, just because of the cutting down on the amount of space and those kinds of things. But you're right that his movement skills are crazy, particularly for a guy of that size, and it's really just a case of how much you want to bet on that.
It is. It's where a landing spot is so critical for him. And I think ideally, I spoke about this a few months ago. Like my ideal situation for him before he retired was to play for Aaron Cromer and to kick inside at left guard, take over for David Andrews, play next to Deion Dawkins, because Aaron Cromer, he produced and really groomed kind of Carl Nix and Roger Saffold. And my comparison for Kadyn Proctor is Roger Saffold. So, played left tackle at Indiana, kicked inside as a pro. I think they look very similar on film. They're built very similarly. They move very similar. Could Roger Saffold play tackle in today's NFL and like Ben Johnson's scheme? I think probably so. Especially like a young, St. Louis Rams, Roger Saffold. Yeah, I think that probably could happen. Can Kadyn Proctor play left tackle for somewhere like that? Where it's that friendly of a scheme? I think, probably. But I think he just probably would, honestly. This is where I'm kind of torn on the positional projection for him. But I think as a pro playing guard, since Aaron Cromer's gone, obviously, maybe Philly, even though Stoutland's gone, still you have that infrastructure in place with the room to where, he doesn't have to play tackle. So there's some scenarios where I think he could play guard, kick inside, but you have to have, I think, established tackles in place for that to happen. And teams they're picking in this draft who are probably going to pick him. I think chances are he's probably going to play tackle. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating to track, but I think landing spot for him and what he's asked to do, what he's not asked to do, who he's surrounded by, those sorts of things is probably more important than any guy we're going to talk about, except maybe one other guy I could think of.
I know a lot of fans will say, well, Alabama tackle, and I know Proctor played on the left side, but size-wise, similar to like a J.C. Latham, DJ Fluker, Andre Smith, like all of these monster right tackles that Alabama has put into the NFL. And, for some players like Fluker, it was better at guard. And, it didn't always go well, living up to the hype coming out of Bama. Where do you see, not to put you on the spot and say rank these guys, but how does he compare to, say, the historic Bama monsters that they've put into the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andre Smith was more of like a flat body, kind of a sloppy build kind of guy, whereas Proctor's like extremely lean for 350 pounds. Just built totally different. I think Latham is probably more of an accurate one-to-one, as close as you're going to get. And Latham, I think it's too early to really say on Latham. I think flashes have certainly been there. I don't think it's been terrible for Latham, in my opinion. I know he's gotten a lot of flack, online and stuff like that, but a little bit hurt this year as well, missed a few games. I think it's just early on Latham. But I think in 2 years from now, we could probably be having a very similar conversation about Kadyn Proctor. And, again, that's why I hesitate to draft him in the first round.
And do you think, really quick, to finish up on Proctor, teams are going to look at him and say 6'7", 350, he catches screens, he has these technique issues and inconsistency. How many O-line coaches are just raising their hand saying, I got this, I'll fix this? Forget Fano and his technical expertise. Give me Kadyn Proctor, and I'll turn him into what he's supposed to be.
So another thing that I will say about this as well, just, talking to Duke Manyweather, about his guys and stuff, and he trains Kadyn Proctor, and, and when you talk to people at Alabama as well, like Proctor, I think even though we talked about maybe some weight concerns and stuff like that, I think the competitive drive there with Proctor is certainly very high in terms of attacking the process, being consistent, rising up to challenges. And I think if that is indeed legit, which I believe it is, when you pair that with the physical traits as an offensive line coach, I could very well see, yes, give me Proctor over all these other guys. If I know a guy is actually going to work and be dedicated and all those sort of things, and he has that talent, then yes, I will, stake my name on this guy and see if I can make it work, as opposed to maybe some other tackles who are 350 plus or so that maybe aren't attacking things the same way, but they're super talented, so I'll leave it at that. But I think that is going to be part of the calculus. And for that reason, I would expect Proctor to have a good chance of going much higher than we're talking about him right now.
We can't go too much farther down the offensive tackle rankings before we answer the question that I'm sure a lot of people are asking, which is, where is Francis Mauigoa? Most people's offensive tackle one, number 5, I think, on the consensus board right now, overall in the entire draft. But you don't see him as a tackle. You're in the Mike Renner bucket of let's kick him inside.
Yeah. So Mauigoa, I will say, if you do keep him at tackle, I see a kind of like a supercharged, like a stronger Jermaine Illuminor. That's a guy who I think he looks a lot like on film, and Illuminor is a guy who, depending on who, I think if you watch Illuminor play, he's fine. He's a solid right tackle. You could win with that guy. I think Mauigoa could be that. Similar to how I felt like Will Campbell last year. I had Will Campbell at tackle, but I had Will Campbell at guard, but I thought he could have played tackle and been fine, which I think he was last year, especially before the knee injury. So I think Mauigoa could be that same level of offensive tackle, solid. The reason why I have him projected inside is because I see a guy who could be a very good guard. Like maybe a Steve Avila kind of, guard, or, that kind of mold is what I see. And it really kind of became concrete to me later in the season, specifically the college football playoff. When you watch those handful of games, I saw him struggle more than he did early in the year in terms of dealing with movement across his face. You could see some of his movement skills aren't quite as fluid, as you would ideally want for a high-end tackle, especially a top 5, top 10 tackle. I just didn't see the movement skills there that signal he's going to be like an all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber tackle. So it just comes down to, do you want a solid guy who you could count on to be, middle of the pack, with maybe an above average run blocker at tackle, or do you want to have an all-pro, Pro Bowl potential at guard? For me, with Mauigoa, I just feel more comfortable with the latter. So, I don't think it's crazy to keep him at tackle, but I just think his range as well in pass protection isn't necessarily great. But his anchor and his play strength, kind of the total inverse of Spencer Fano, is excellent. Like, guys are not going to go down the middle of him. They're not going to bull rush him. He's going to be able to create movement at the point of attack on defensive linemen routinely. It's just, if he's climbing to the second level and screens and, expanding his set points and protecting the corner, I don't see it being as good as Fano. So, it's just like what you could correct, what you can't, where you could work through and not at tackle, and I would just rather work with Fano's traits at tackle than Mauigoa, in my opinion.
That's a great way of describing it, though, that it's all about, what you can fix and what you can't. Because to me, when I watch Mauigoa, I thought he had the athleticism, even the reactive athleticism, to be able to play a tackle and be good. But all of his losses to me tended to look kind of the same, which is he just ends up bending, getting too top heavy, losing his balance, almost toppling over, whether it's to an inside counter, whether it's just he gets disengaged and suddenly he capsizes, it's like an oak tree falling over. He just goes once he's lost the balance. So do you think he doesn't have the athleticism to get it done, or you're seeing the same thing, that it's that kind of tendency to bend at the waist and get himself into trouble is what's going to stop him, or why you don't like him at tackle as much as kicking him inside?
Yeah, which to me, seeing that bending at the waist and that's a function to me of a lack of foot quickness and range to expand your set points. Say if you're taking a 45-degree set and you get to a spot against a wide nine rusher and he stems inside and then hits a cross chop outside, you bite on that inside move and you step inside with that inside foot. Your ability to then expand back outside to protect the corner, for him specifically, I just don't think he has that wiggle, that reactionary quickness, that redirectability to necessarily do that against NFL competition, to protect the corner in, specifically true drop back situations where you don't have help, where it's not play action, where you're on an island, it's obvious pass, those sorts of situations. I just think his ceiling is lower than Fano. Now, if you're in a system where, you have a quarterback who doesn't drift and, a veteran guy and, he's never creating 10-yard pockets, and it's always 8.5, 9, then yeah, maybe I'll stick Mauigoa at tackle and, be fine with it. But if you're a different situation and, it's a younger quarterback and those sorts of things, then, I just think, his ceiling just lowers. So that, and then you mentioned the inside counters as well. It's just basically what I said, biting inside and then losing outside, the inverse. If a guy is threatening you with speed and you have to go get him and you overset and then he crosses your face, again, we see some of those situations on film with him where he's not able to get his feet back in front of that block in time, and therefore he's reaching with his upper body and then he's leaning, and that's where you see guys slip him. So yeah, just like space isn't necessarily his friend necessarily, you know what I mean? He's manipulated by that easier than Fano. But if you could condense and restrict the amount of space he plays with at tackle and force guys to run through him and into him, then he's going to be really good. But yeah, it just depends, I think, where he is.
So for Mauigoa, then, is he number one guard for you?
No, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and that's only because we haven't seen him do it. I have a first round grade on him though. So I have 3 first round grades in this class. So Spencer Fano, Francis Mauigoa, and then, Vega Ioane, from Penn State. So, Venga is my number 1 guard in the class just because, we've seen him play guard, and I just don't think there's as much of a projection. I think I see them very similar in terms of the caliber of guard that they're going to be in the NFL, both year 1 starting offensive guards. That's baking in the projection piece with Mauigoa, but with Venga, we've seen it. So I just give him a little bit of an edge there.
All right, we'll circle back to the guard rankings. So Mauigoa going to be in the guard ranking for you. We've talked a couple offensive tackles. Who would be offensive tackle 3 then on your list?
Yeah, so tackle 3 for me is Blake Miller from Clemson. So, I like Blake Miller in terms of his floor a lot. I just think his profile as a prospect is somewhat unique in terms of he's a 4-year starter, but he's also still very young. So he's durable. He's very alert when you watch him on film. Active, physical, strong hands. I think good athletic ability, not great. Very long. I love his demeanor. I mean, he's kind of brings that tenacity as a finisher. I don't think that he plays with a ton of power necessarily or play strength. I think it's fine, solid, but I just think his size, his length, the way he uses his hands, and then the experience level, the durability. I think he's missed, I think it's like 2 or 3 practices over 4 years. When you have a guy that reliable for that long, who's still very young, who plays the style that he plays with. I just see a guy who's going to be a solid starter. Yeah, maybe never make a Pro Bowl, but I compared him to Colton McKivitz. That's just kind of who I see. McKivitz, the last year and a half has really turned into a nice player. So I just see that caliber of right tackle, I'd say McKivitz is top 12, top 15 right tackle in the league. I feel really good about Blake Miller being that caliber of right tackle. And then the next guy is more of a boom bust guy who, you could draft before him if you want, but yeah. So.
All right, let's go to. I liked Blake Miller a lot, by the way. Every time I watched him, was impressed, and I think more impressed every time I watched. Who is tackle 4? I got a feeling I know who it is.
Yeah, Monroe Freeling from Georgia.
Freeling.
They have the same exact grade. It's just when we're stacking our board, I have Blake Miller. I would rather pick Miller in more scenarios than Freeling. I just think it's more of a quote unquote safe kind of projection to the pros. Whereas Freeling, it has a little bit more of that home run swing kind of aspect to it where, the payoff could be bigger in terms of the caliber of starter that you'll have. It's just there's more variance there, partly based on lack of experience, 1 year to 4 year starter. That's part of it. And then with that, just less of a refined skill set, I would say, with Freeling in pass protection, in terms of his technique, hands, the way he uses his hands, his footwork. It's just a little bit more up and down. However, the flashes are outstanding. His physical traits are outstanding. Freeling to me looks a lot like Colton Miller did at UCLA, or like even going back a little further, Anthony Costanzo, when he came out, he was like a late first round grade for the Colts. So those are the two guys that I think if you're looking at high end comps for Freeling, I think those are within the realm of possibility. But then also I don't think it's crazy to say, he's comparable to a guy like Tyler Guyton. As well in terms of just 6'7" plus, runs like a deer, long, the flashes are outstandanding. Like this looks like a future left tackle who could be a Pro Bowler. But I think when you watch enough of his film, he did have an injury this year too, so it's kind of hard to say how much that affected his ability to stick on blocks and anchor and things like that. But it was a left leg injury against Kentucky. It was like week 5 that he suffered that injury. So that kind of, but I think when you watch his last 3 games, I think especially that's when you really get to see him at his best. So, but yeah, Freeling is a guy I like a lot. I have a 2nd round grade on him, just like I do Blake Miller. But it's just, he's probably going to go much higher than that, I would expect.
That's the thing. You named a bunch of guys there that were all drafted in the kind of mid to late first round, between Costanzo, Tyler Guyton, et cetera. We're seeing mock drafts where Freeling reasonably common now, going 6 overall to the Browns. Like how much of a reach, I guess, would you consider that if somebody bet on those athletic traits and was like, yeah, he's worth the 6th overall pick?
I mean, it's definitely a reach based on my grade, for sure. It's, Cleveland with what they have right now. I know George Warhop's there with Bobby Johnson as an assistant. I feel pretty good about that, actually. Warhop's been around a long time, developed a lot of offensive linemen. So that kind of helps a little bit, playing next to Zion Johnson. That doesn't necessarily make me feel great in terms of, it's not Joe Tooney or something. I don't know that he'll have like a ton of stability in the offensive line room in terms like him going to Cleveland. He's going to be counted on to potentially be the guy sooner rather than later. And that gives me a little bit of hesitancy. I don't know how good I feel about that happening in terms of the hierarchy of the room. Ideally, again, he would go to a place where he could either be brought along slowly or, the Tunsil route where he plays guard and then takes over for tackle like Tunsil did in Miami for Brandon Albert, or he's going to a room with, like Chicago or something, where you have all these veterans and you have a stud next to you and the infrastructure's in place. Like, I think that sort of scenario would allow him to reach his full potential sooner with the highest degree of certainty. But Cleveland, like, that one, the coaching scenario makes me feel pretty good. But then quarterback, is that going to help him in pass protection? Probably not. So yeah, that one to me, that makes me nervous, at 6 to Cleveland specifically.
To be clear on Freeling, he's 6'7", 315, just under 35-inch arms at the combine, which means they could be 37 given those measurements. 4.93 40, which is 94th percentile among tackles, 1.71 10-yard split. So he's over the 90th percentile in all the workouts that he did, vertical jump, broad jump. How much do you care about the physical ability, the athleticism, and how much do you think that means, all right, once he's over, because you said he's inexperienced, only 1,600 plus total snaps in his career. Does he look like a high-end starter, potentially, in 3 years, and what needs to be cleaned up for him to even reach that?
Yeah, he certainly has the traits to be a high-end starter, absolutely. I don't think there's any question. So I think Colton Miller is the one that I just keep thinking about at UCLA, who, similar spider charts, maxed out, just freak athlete, but raw. And, it just, Colton Miller worked out, obviously, he never.
Took a couple years, but then he did, yes.
Took a couple years,
It was the right pattern, yep.
Yeah, and then where he got drafted, I think, fits, well, because Colton Miller's never been a top 5 left tackle, in my opinion. He's never been Trev Williams or, any of these guys, Tristan Wirfs. So, his traits and athletic ability signal like Colton Miller should be an elite tackle, but he never was. But he turned into an above average tackle. Now, Freeling has similar traits, similar athletic ability. I think he could turn into, again, an above average tackle. And is there a chance that he could be elite? Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't bet on that, though. In terms of what he has to clean up, I think most of my concerns are in the run game with him. He plays very upright. And that leads him to lunging into overextension as a drive blocker in particular. If you just envision, front side of outside zone, kick out blocks or a base block or a down block, on the front side of a gap run, when he actually has to block a defensive lineman, 3 technique or 5 technique one-on-one, and those guys are able to get inside his frame and maybe push-pull him or change their position, their leverage. His ability to adapt to that on the fly is lacking, in my opinion, and it leads to him getting overextended and just falling off of the block and guys getting around him pretty quickly. So in terms of him like spearheading a run game at the first level, I don't necessarily see that being very good right now. I see it being kind of an issue as a pro. But, the stuff that you do like is, I would say like a, front side deuce block, say run and power, and he's just blocking down on a 3 technique and bumping him and climbing to the scraping linebacker over the top. That's when Freeling, you sit up in your chair and you're like, okay, this guy's super fluid. He can combo and climb and pick off backers very well. And then in the screen game, he's a weapon as well. So if you're in a system where, you're able to be featured in that way, I think as a run blocker, he could do some really nice things for you. But if you're counting on him to, pry open that front side end consistently and, create space that way, I just think right now, based on how I saw his film, like that is one specific area that gives me pause. And then in pass protection as well, I think he's overall raw in terms of his positional leverage on pass rushers, and he can get baited into oversetting. He could chase things, stutters, hesitations, setup moves. He's not super disciplined on maintaining inside out positioning on those sorts of things. So I think he could be manipulated pretty easily on an island in pass protection by NFL rushers, which that's where technique and skill comes in as a tackle, and athletic ability can get you to spots quickly, and then you can recover out of bad positions well. But everything in between is the skill. And for him, I just think it's just more of a blank kind of, underdeveloped area of his game, and how quickly that gets colored in. It's hard to say, with these guys, without knowing them and having a ton of inside information and stuff, which I don't on him at all. So it's like, I think situation for him matters more than Blake Miller. And that's why I have Blake Miller higher, same grade, but I would take Blake Miller in more scenarios, because I just think my chances of getting a guy I can count on sooner are higher with Blake Miller. And yeah, in 3 years, Freeling could be a tier better than Blake Miller, but he could also be a tier below Blake Miller. Whereas Blake Miller, I'm hitting a double, Freeling, I'm swinging for the fences.
So who's our fifth guy? Who's OT5 for you? And then any other names you would want to throw into the mix to talk about in the offensive tackle list before we go inside to guard?
Yeah, Caleb Lomu is fifth for me. So just right outside these guys. Kind of a similar kind of tone as Monroe Freeling, I would say. I just think there's a little bit more play strength concerns for me with Lomu as opposed to Freeling. I think Freeling is just, he's bigger, a little bit more sturdy, specifically with anchoring. Now, I think the technique, there is a little shaky there for Freeling in terms of technique, but I just don't see Lomu having the same ability to anchor when his technique is good either. So it's just like, I just think play strength for Caleb Lomu to me is a bigger concern than Freeling, but a very similar kind of mover in pass protection, I would say. Just very fluid. He has a lot of natural movement patterns in pass protection in terms of his pass sets, his recovery, his redirecting, I think is pretty good. And you could see some of that translate in the run game as well. So it's just a really good athlete, I think, at tackle. I think the Texas Tech game, again, similar to Fano, is a good one to watch. Him against Romello Height, lost some, but also matched up well in that game. But similar questions as well with Fano in terms of the scheme. That's going to be something else, that's going to be kind of a adjustment period for him. But, the more I looked at him, the more I envisioned sort of like a Walker Little. That's my pro comparison for him. And I think they play similar. How Walker Little played at Stanford, looked at Stanford. So I just think very similar caliber of player as Walker Little is kind of how I would describe him in a nutshell.
Lomu's just a redshirt sophomore coming out right now, and watching him, I definitely thought got his shoulders turned a little bit too early at times, and I just thought technique and core strength improvement, and he's there, man. I feel like, I'm not saying I like him more than Freeling, but I'm with you. It's a similar conversation, just a couple what ifs, and I think you're talking about a potentially good starter here.
Yep. Yeah, those are the five I think that I would be most excited about. And then there's some other guys, later on. There's another guy, if you want to talk about him, from Arizona State, who might go in the first round. But I have him. He's my OT6. So that would be the next
Max
guy.
Iheanachor. Yeah, give us the quick breakdown on Max. All right, quick break to talk about our friends over at Root Insurance. Root Insurance believes that good drivers deserve better rates, so they've created a new kind of car insurance that rewards good drivers in an easy-to-use app. Traditional car insurance companies focus on demographics like age, zip code, occupation, and credit score to price your coverage, but when Root offers a rate, your behavior behind the wheel gets more weight than any other single factor. They didn't use occupation or education level to negatively affect your rate. While you drive, Root gathers and analyzes data from your smartphone's sensors, and after a few weeks, you'll get a car insurance quote based primarily on your driving. Save up to 44% off your initial Root quote after you take the test drive. If you need a tow truck, jump start, or lock your keys in the car, Root will cover the help you need to get back on the road when you opt into roadside assistance. The Root app makes it easy to edit your coverage, update your policy, or file a claim in just 3 minutes. You can get started today at Root.com.
Yeah, so I think he's the most raw of any of these guys. I think when you watch him, you could see sort of his background. He's a soccer player, hasn't been playing football that long, and a little bit inexperienced as well. But I just think there's lapses in his spatial awareness that are pretty glaring on film when you watch him, just specifically handling games and stunts and, just his maintaining levels and kind of knowing where he is on the field at all times. I just think it's kind of hit or miss for him. I think his hands are very raw. in terms of, how he approaches and strikes, timing, placement, rushers. When it lands and he gets his hands on guys, it's very impressive. I think he physically outclasses a lot of guys that he saw at Arizona State, but technique-wise, I just think there's breakdowns there that also were evident at the Senior Bowl as well, where it's very hot and cold. And now, again, another guy, really good traits, really good. I wouldn't say the flashes are as good as Freeling or Lomu, in my opinion, on film. But he certainly does have some flashes. I just think that the gap between his pure physical talent and skill set is wider than these other guys. So there's just more variance here. But a guy, I have a 3rd round grade on him, like a high 3rd. So, probably, that means he's going to go in the 2nd and maybe
so he'll
the 1st.
Also go late 1st.
Yeah, probably just because the traits, 4.91, 1.73, all this, all those sorts of things, which to me isn't enough to cement him in the 1st round personally. However, I we could forecast him going in the 1st round. It's just, I just think the gap there is a little bit wider than these other guys that we're talking about.
All right, Brandon, let's get to guard. You already mentioned Vega Ioane being the #1 guard out of Penn State. What have you seen from him?
Yeah, I mean, I think play strength is first and foremost. His ability to hold ground when he needs to hold ground and take ground when he needs to take it. I just think that right there is going to translate, I think, at a high level right away in the NFL. He's going to be able to do that on pretty much anything you want him to do in almost any scheme. So, that in of itself, with his size, with his demeanor, the way he plays, I think he has good enough athletic ability. I don't think he's a great athlete, but I think it's good enough. I just think all those things are just going to lend themselves to a above average starting guard pretty much right away in the NFL. Very similar grade to, that I had on Tyler Booker. I actually compared him to Larry Warford, which is a
throwback.
Yeah, throwback there.
Brandon, we want to do a show where we just name old players. You're doing a good job. So you're Roger Saffold, Larry Warford. We'll just get someone with a different position group, and we'll just name old players for an hour. It'd be awesome.
Dude, I'll make that a weekly segment if you want.
Everybody wants to do this. We're really doing it. This is June content, by the way. This is great.
That's great. Yeah, but Warford, I'm glad you guys recognize that name, appreciate it. But yeah, that's the caliber of guard that I see. Warford was good. Had some very good years, I would say, especially in New Orleans there. But that's just the kind of guy I see. Booker is the most relevant one, from what we've seen last year. I think Booker had a really good rookie year. I don't know that, the difference between those two to me is I don't think Venga is quite as physically imposing as Booker is in terms of just his size. But I do think that Venga plays with a little bit better body control than Booker did, specifically in pass protection. So, that would be kind of the difference there in their specific games, but a very similar caliber of player and impact, I think, as a rookie. So that's what I would expect from him watching his tape.
Do you think that does he fit in every scheme? It feels like if there's a weakness to his game, it's, the kind of speed, quickness. Like, does he fit in like a wide zone run scheme that's going to ask him to be, nobody's running the Alex Gibbs Denver stuff anymore, truly, but that's the kind of area where he would struggle the most.
Yeah, I think his game, similar to Booker, kind of breaks down when he gets to the 2nd and 3rd levels, and you're not going to really see his best, him intersect a lot of targets out there necessarily. Now, if it's inside the box, 2nd level climbs, he could certainly get his hands on those guys and make big time impact blocks, which he did at Penn State last year. But typically those come on inside zone gap runs, when you're climbing. But yeah, the ones where you have to turn, run, expand, and get outside the box and then track 2nd level guys or 3rd level guys. That's why, I kind of mentioned like more of a solid athlete, to where that can be exposed in space a little bit more. But I think he plays with really good body control and pass protection. He's not like over aggressive or overly reliant on his power and size, I would say, as a pass protector specifically. I think there's a lot of nuance to his game in pass protection, which to me, he doesn't like chase stuff a lot. He could be patient. He knows how to play big and make guys, kind of come to him and not chase things. And so I just think, that could be mitigated in pass protection for sure based on how he plays. But yeah, I think you're right. Like the pure wide zone screen game, stuff like that. I don't know that he's going to necessarily be a weapon or anything, but, inside the box is really where he's going to, I think, make a big impact as a run blocker on the first and second level.
So you got a first-round grade on Ioane, number 1 guard. We talked about Mauigoa. Is he guard 2 for you then? Okay.
Yeah, they're the same grade. It's just Venga, just because he's played guard.
And because he's done it before, you'd give him the nod. And then who's the number 3 guard on your top 5 here?
Yeah, number 3 for me is Texas A&M's left guard, Chase Basantis. So, I describe him as a light-footed guard. He creates really quick leverage on blocks, good hands, good balance. He steers guys away from the ball really well. So I just think he kind of remind me, this is another kind of old school one, I guess, but Mark Lewinsky, that's my comparison for him, who was, kind of a solid starter. I have a late second round grade on Basantis. So there's a gap here. I have first round grades on Venga and Mauigoa, and then a late second on Basantis. So I see a guy, and the reason for that really is because I think, again, positional leverage and pass protection opens up too early, leans into blocks, but he has really good movement skills and recovery skills to get out of compromising positions. So I think he could develop that. And, these are fixable things for him for the most part. But he has a sawed-off build. He's not the most physically imposing guy. But I do think he is strong, and he's explosive, and he recovers well. So, that's kind of where I landed on him, and I see a solid guard here.
Nice. Who's next up on the list?
Next up would be Emmanuel Pregnon from Oregon, who has the same exact grade as Basantis. It's just I favor kind of the traits and what Basantis brings, but late second round grade here. Very different player. Emmanuel Pregnon is a hulking physical presence who is huge. I mean, I'd say outstanding upper body strength. He has giant hands. Once he gets his hands on you, reps are typically over. Vice grips.
11-inch hands, Sam. I know that's
pretty impressive.
Crazy
99th percentile guard hands here.
It's no Steve Palazzolo, but it's pretty good.
DeForest Buckner territory, though.
Yeah, for sure. And he actually has this thing where he can't even fully open up his hands, which I've seen, because his fingers are kind of mashed. So his hands are gnarly. They're it's pretty wild. And just the way he's built, and he plays that way. I mean, his play strength is legit. It's really good in terms of, again, I look at it in kind of a linear sort of way. If he's creating movement, on tightly aligned defensive linemen in front of him, he could do that at a high level. And then anchoring, I think his anchor is very good as well. It's just when more space is introduced into the picture, I think things fall apart for him. He doesn't always bring his feet into contact. He can be a little over aggressive. I think he needs to tighten up his footwork quite a bit, especially as you watch him later in the year. Some of these guys, they get better throughout the year. I thought Pregnon was better early in the year, and then later in the year, I just thought he was more up and down as the year went on. So that gave me a little bit of pause there as well. I think he's a solid athlete, not a great athlete. But yeah, just kind of a heavy sort of playing style, which is good and bad. But it introduces a little bit more variance there. I compared him to Robert Hunt, who, kind of a similar kind of guy. Hunt he misses big in the NFL. I mean, when he misses and he loses reps, it's glaring. But at the same time, Robert Hunt is a true kind of enforcing presence to where you kind of live with those losses because of what he can do, imposing his will on guys. So, yeah, I mean, similar grade to Keylan Rutledge last year, Osiris Torrance, Donovan Jackson. Some of these guys went in the first, but, usually second round kind of guys. And, yeah, that's kind of the bucket I put Pregnon in.
Pregnon, also interesting career, started at Wyoming, 4-year starter across Wyoming, 2 years at USC, and then at Oregon. I think in totality felt like he improved across all 4 years. How do you weigh that? You know, either the portal, seeing a player across 3 different schemes, or growth going from, 3 different schools, or just overall, start to finish, seeing a guy progress from freshman to senior year?
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, because I didn't start watching him until 24, and I thought he got a lot better the first 4 or 5 games this year, and that's why I kind of mentioned, like, then I thought he actually took a little bit of a step back in his technique and things like that this year, which grand scheme of 4-year starting, not super concerning, but not exactly the trend. It doesn't necessarily fit what you would want to see. And, he also is, older as well. He'll be 25 in October. So not that that's a huge red flag or anything, but he's physically developed, as a 25-year-old would be. So he's ready to go in terms of a play strength standpoint. There's no question about that. But yeah, that's kind of the interesting thing going back to Miller, also a 4-year starter. He's 22. That's why I thought it was kind of unique. But yeah, Pregnon, I just think his career and overall trend of getting better probably helps him, even if there was a little bit more of an erratic kind of tone there, I think, this year at Oregon.
He feels like he's the kind of player, though, that some coaches are going to love because
for sure.
He's so explosive and he can absolutely detonate people on contact. Like, I feel it's always interesting to me, which coaches love the guys that can create the highlight movement, the absolute explosive, destructive blocks versus the guys that just don't lose, and maybe they don't generate this incredible amount of movement, but they're not going to be the reason that a guy is running almost, unblocked through to the quarterback or the running back. Pregnon's the kind of guy where if your coach loves the guy that is able to just destroy a defensive player, that's your guy.
Yeah, I mean, him, Venga, and Mauigoa are those guys, to me, to varying degrees. I just think Pregnon, I think, like the Hunt factor, Robert Hunt, just the glaring losses are going to happen too as well, I think, and I feel more sure of that than those other guys. So yeah, but I do think the high end aspects of his film are offensive line coaches with his traits they're going to love that. So yeah, he's a good player. I mean, I just see more of, like, again, just probably a solid NFL starter who could have maybe a couple very good years, very good aspects of their game. I mean, Robert Hunt became the highest paid guard in the league, so, all credit to him. But when you watch his film and stuff, like, I just don't think the consistency is quite there. But you live with that when you have those high-end things. So
plus one of the greatest highlights in NFL history for Robert Hunt.
Greatest catches.
Intercepting the screen pass. All right, OG5. Who's the number 5 guard? And then we'll go through the centers quickly.
Yeah, so this guy's just a hair below these guys for me, but he's probably my favorite guy of all these. And Keylan Rutledge from Georgia Tech. So very similar kind of tone like that we're taking with these guys in terms of, if you want to talk about detonating guys. I mean, you watch his tape at Georgia Tech this year. To me, I thought he had more pancakes than anybody I watched in this class.
Destroyed linebackers. He was killing them.
It's very clear, what he's bringing to the field, and I think that'll be able to translate to the pro game. It's just, again, needs to clean up his footwork and pass protection. I just did a film room with him, and it was interesting how he talks about, like, he really wants to get better when he has the slide to his side and the center coming his way. He got into trouble on film in college where he didn't always factor that in. So if he had a 3 technique, he would often overset them unnecessarily because, I mean, he has inside help with the center. So you see oversets on his film, but then we talk about, he's like, man, as the year progressed, I just realized, especially when this seems simple, but when I have the slide to my side, I don't have to even think about or come close to oversetting this 3 technique. I can actually set short on him because I have that inside presence. And then I could work my way outside after the fact, to protect that corner. So just little stuff like that. I mean, in pass protection, it adds up, but he had some glaring losses this year on film. But man, when you watch Keylan Rutledge, the size, the play strength, the power, the demeanor is all there. He just looks to me very similar to like Christian Mahogany, Osiris Torrance, maybe not quite as physically imposing. Cade Mays is another one that, I think he could play at that level. Maybe like a Ryan Jensen, so that's the kind of guy I see. There's going to be some clean losses in pass protection specifically as a pro, I'm sure, but heavy hands, bad intentions with the size and the power to back it up. And I think offensive line coaches are going to love the way he's wired, the stuff he's overcome. He suffered a gruesome foot injury from a car accident, almost lost his foot. He overcame that. So like he's highly competitive, resilient, all that type of stuff. Like a guy offensive line coaches are going to love, and a guy that I would definitely bet on to stick for 2-3 contracts and be solid, to above average.
So you have the guards spread out around that first, second, early third round range, but all players that could step in and start here maybe as rookies and continue to improve.
Yeah, those 5 would be the ones I'd feel really comfortable with. And then another one that's kind of outside there, the next guy for me before even a steeper drop off would be Jennings Dunker from Iowa. So that's a projection inside to guard. He played right tackle at Iowa, but I think another similar kind of style, in terms of winning with size and strength. I just think Dunker is more stiff than all these guys in terms of his ability or inability to recover. I think is more stark than all these other guys. He's less fluid of an athlete, but detonates guys for sure. Certainly wired the right way, all that. So he's another guy. No offensive line coach is going to love Jennings Dunker. So I wouldn't be surprised if he plays, 2-3 contracts as well. I just don't see a ceiling like these other guys.
Plus the mullet. We've got to bump him up around because of the mullet.
The look, all that stuff. Yeah.
Mullet bump is real when it comes to O-line hype. What does the center class look like, and who's your number one center in this class?
This is just a collection of guys, I think, that starts around. So my highest graded center is Sam Hecht from Kansas State, who I have a 4th round grade on. So, and then there's a lot of 4th, 5th round centers. So this is truly like pick your flavor kind of thing to me. There's 5 or 6 guys here that I can make a case for. But the reason why I want Sam Hecht number 1 is I just think his ability to sustain blocks in the run game, the preciseness of his, I would say, footwork and aiming points, and the way he fits on blocks is very consistent. And he's able to create leverage and sustain leverage at a high level once he's engaged. You watch him work combo blocks. It's really impressive. Outside zone, inside zone. So I just think he's going to be able to do that and, fit in along an offensive line as the, 4th or 5th best starter on a line early on and be, an adequate to solid level starter. I compared him to Tyler Biadasz. I think that's kind of like, a high-end comp for him. But Biadasz, it took a couple years for Biadasz to really turn into what he turned into. But Hunter Norzad is another one who kind of, he hasn't got a chance playing behind Creed, but I think Norzad could be probably a similar level guy. Luke Fortner, kind of like that guy, who had a nice year last year in New Orleans. Sam Hecht, I think, is just 4th or 5th best starter on your line. You don't want him to be one of your top 3 guys, but he could function as part of a line and play pretty good football for you.
Most people have him and Connor Liu in a sort of similar range in this draft for the Auburn center. Is that your second guy, or have you got someone else?
Not my second, but in the same bucket as the 2 guys above him, actually. So I have Jake Slaughter as my second guy from Florida. A guy who really grew on me this year, especially based on last year. I just think he's been trending up for the last year and a half that I've watched him and been exposed to him. But just another guy who is very efficient in what he does in terms of the timing that he plays with, getting to spots on time. I love the experience and just sort of the level of competition that he's executed against as well. I think he's solid kind of across the board in terms of movement skills, play strength. I really like the urgency he plays with. He's very alert. And, in terms of, when the ball's snapped, his ability to plug the A gaps, against games, twists, loopers, things like that. I think he does a nice job in that regard. So, another guy who could kind of glue the offensive line together and be, a functional starting center in the NFL. Throwback here a little bit. I compared him to Chase Rulier. If you remember him from Washington.
I loved Chase. Loved him coming out.
Yeah, so similar kind of guy to me. Drew Kendall is another guy who, we haven't seen play a whole lot right now, but similar grade for me in years past. So, yeah, Slaughter I like. And then another guy, this is more of a projection than Lou, but I would kind of edge him over Lou a little bit, and that's Brian Parker from Duke. Played right tackle there this year. I think he's a really good athlete on film with strong hands. It's just an excellent competitive toughness. I think he's probably the best finisher of all these guys we're going to talk about at center, just with the kind of the chippiness that he plays with. And I think he has the athletic ability and the strong hands to kind of allow that to translate a little bit as a pro. It's just play strength is definitely a concern with him. Just his, all these guys don't necessarily have like the most physically imposing frames. But I think he's a little light in the pants, so to speak. Anchor isn't great. I think at center that could be mitigated a little bit with how quick he is and how well he uses his hands to kind of, close that runway on nose tackles and defensive linemen before they can build up ahead of steam. And I think he could probably do that well enough to play center in the NFL. Compared him to Ryan Bates, who's kind of been a swing interior guy. Robert Hainsey is a very similar projection who played right tackle at Notre Dame, kicked inside. I think Parker is going to be that caliber of guy. So, yeah. And then Lou, I have, again, in the same exact bucket as all these guys, but below them. I was a little underwhelmed with Lou. This could just be my biases here because, I watched Lou going into the year expecting something that I didn't get. I was expecting, when I watched Lou based on the hype that he had in the fall or summer, I was expecting, Zach Frazier, Creed Humphrey, like these guys. I was expecting a first-round center, and I just personally didn't see anything close to that. I saw more of a guy who, is efficient in his movements, pretty good athlete. I don't think his play strength is very good. I think he regularly got stalemated, flattened out on overtakes, pried open as the rep progressed, average size, weight, and mass, concedes ground more than owns it. But, again, a guy who plays with, I think, an alert, kind of clear-eyed, style and pass protection. He processes things pretty quickly. Pretty good athlete. I like his hands in pass protection. I think he uses pretty good hands. Plays with some good snap out of his stance and stuff like that. But I just compared him to Matt Hennessy, Bo Limmer, Dylan Parham, maybe a Luke Fortner, like that caliber of guy to me. So, yeah, maybe that's unfair. But, yeah, I was expecting a little bit more from Lou than I saw. So
Love it. So a similar range for all those top
Oh, yeah, very,
here.
very similar.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Man, this is fun. Incredible detail. Hope everybody learned something. Tackle, guard, and center class here. Brandon, remind everybody where they could find your stuff. And, man, I love talking a little O-line here with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So trenchwarfare.substack.com is my newsletter, and then bleacherreport.com. You can find all my scouting reports. And, yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Brandon. We really appreciate all the time. We took well over an hour of your time. So we appreciate that. Be sure to check out all Brandon's work. And again, we'll have you on again soon.
Thanks so much, man.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, guys, real quick. Only 40% of our viewers are actually subscribed. So let's change that. Hit that subscribe button. And now let's get back to the action. I always love hearing Brandon's opinions on the offensive line. I think most notably, that's the second guest we've had now that has Francis Mauigoa as a guard first.
Yeah, and I mean, I see it. We said that when we started looking at the tape. I understand why Renner at the time and now Brandon would want to kick him into guard. I think there's enough to work with that I'd give him the shot at tackle first, and then, again, that idea of if he fails at tackle, we can kick him in, and we're pretty confident what we got there. I think the ceiling is high enough that it's worth giving a shot, but I understand the idea of, like, look at the way that guy moves people. Yeah. Again, it's sort of like the way you view Proctor. The deficiencies would be hidden at guard. The strengths remain strengths at guard, so I get it.
The Proctor discussion, man, because every time we do a mock draft, I think you and I'm like back and forth. I'm up and down with him the same way Brandon described. Yeah. But I just see people in the NFL saying 6'7", 350, athletic, and he was supposed to be a top 10 pick. You know, he was in this top 10 discussion. Week 1 gets absolutely smoked against Florida State, and I think people soured on him a little bit, but there are still traits to work with.
There are, and I don't think it's inconsistent. I would keep Mauigoa tackle. I would kick Proctor into guard. I don't think that's necessarily inconsistent because I think Mauigoa loses less often, right? Like they're similar in terms of the reasons would be the same. Like they're both powerful monsters who struggle sometimes with the athleticism and the quickness against smaller players, and sometimes you don't necessarily want them on an island. But I think that causes Mauigoa fewer problems than it causes Proctor, right? Like we talked about it the other day, and I said like the number of plays where the play ends and Proctor is facing the ball, there's so many more than Mauigoa. It's like the broadly speaking, we're talking about similar players, but I think it affects Proctor a lot more than it affects
his strength. Just plays so much in the run game, and it's just for every time we're watching Fano and saying his technique's so good, but if he's off a little bit, he doesn't have the strength or the core strength or the length to make up for it. Proctor's the complete opposite. It does feel like a class of boomer bust-ish type of prospects, right? Every time Brandon was saying these guys are ranked similarly, but Blake Miller's safe, Monroe Freeling's high ceiling. Those aren't just terms. Those are literally like, hey, we could see high-end play from Monroe Freeling. It might just take 2 or 3 years. So I think it's a fascinating O-line class when you break it down that way, and every team's going to value these players differently.
And, of course, as we said, the tackles, it always gets pushed up. Like these guys were talking about it as well. This is quite a lot of concerns. I mean, some like Mauigoa may go 3 overall. Monroe Freeling may go 6 overall. Like we're talking about these guys who've got fairly concerning warts to their game, and they may end up being top 10 draft picks.
It's just massive need at offensive tackle in today's NFL. So we're going through all of our rankings. Be sure to check out. We had Greg Cosell last week talking QBs, JJ Zacharyson. Don't worry about the fantasy in the title. He was breaking down running backs with great depth. Get the offensive line breakdown this week. Next week, we're going to do some edge rushers, and we still have wide receivers to come with Matt Harmon in a couple weeks. So appreciate everybody for being here today. We'll see you again on Monday. More Check the Mic, 9 a.m.